BIPOC-led operating support grant. I'll talk to you later.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Thanks.
Irene, it's so good to see you also.
Yes, you too, Ariel. Thank you.
Well, this just makes me so happy. It is 8:01 a.m. Pacific Standard Time where I am located. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bobby Mann. I'm the Maddie's Human Animal Support Services Pilot Director. So honored and so excited to be hosting this call with my dear friend, Ariels Zhang, who I'm going to allow to introduce herself because we're going to be talking a lot about privilege and opportunity. And it's my absolute privilege to create some space and get out of the way and let this rock star talk all about herself.
Hi, everyone. So I am Ariels Zhang. I am the Chief Strategy Officer here at the Animal Foundation in Las Vegas, Nevada. When I first moved here, everyone corrected me. It is not Nevada, I've learned. But I am so grateful to be here today. And I'm so grateful that, that Mary gave me this space and Bobby gave me this space. And so am I going to kick it off with motivation now, Bobby?
Let's give a quick update as well. So unfortunately, Mary Smith, our dear Mary, is not going to be able to join us today and possibly next week. She's dealing with some family stuff that's going on. And so we want to definitely hold her near and dear to our hearts and lift her up. Amber and I are actually going to be sending an e-card for all of you to sign, hopefully, so we can literally make the biggest e-card in the history of animal welfare and get it over to Mary, since she's always kicking off our weeks with a bit of motivation. But Mary reached out to me and said, if there is one person in all of animal welfare that I feel like I would love to share that space with, and that was Ariels Zhang. For those of you who don't know, Ariel has been in this space relatively a short period of time, so less than a year and a half, and is already making a giant impact. Not only is she supporting the animals in her community with her business background, she's helping so many people just like me just be better at the business of saving lives. She also recently had a candid conversation with Maddie's Fund where she talked about all sorts of amazing things, which I believe Allison can read my mind and has already put it in the chat, even though we didn't set that up. So Allison, I appreciate you for that. But without further ado, Ariel, I'm going to toss it back to you for a little bit of Monday motivation.
Sounds great. Yeah, I hope that we think about Mary and the light that she brings to everyone in these calls and outside of these calls. And I'm super grateful for her. But so when Bobby and Mary approached me to talk today, I was thinking about, what am I going to talk about and what was important. And my husband is in the military. He's currently in Germany, advising on the Ukraine situation. And so that is really near and dear to us, and something that we're following really closely. And I feel like what it's really highlighted for me is my privilege, the privilege that I can sleep safe at night and everything that I have going on in my life. And then obviously Mary giving me this opportunity just made me super grateful. And I feel like when those two things combined, I really thought about what else could I do. And from my perspective, it's really being intentionally aware of my privilege. And so I think when I look at this call every week, I think about, all the people that are on this call, the organizations that you represent. We have some funders on this call. I feel like we have some really senior leaders. And so whether it's that privilege of your organization or the privilege of the title that you hold or the privilege of what you look like, I think really recognizing that. And then the point and the question that I have for everyone is, how can we intentionally uplift other people using our privilege? And I think it's important to not wait to be asked, but doing it super intentionally and going out of your way to uplift other people. And so I hope that as we go into our week, we seek those opportunities to make a difference in someone else's life who may not be as privileged as we are.
And as a perfect example, when given all that space, Ariel still chooses to make this about other people. And that is why you're one of my favorite people in the world. We're going to pause here. We want to create some space for this conversation. So if anybody would like to unmute, Laura, I saw you shaking your head, maybe giving a couple of snaps. So if you want to share, what are your thoughts?
I think you hit on it by just making space for people, not making it all about yourself, and giving people the room to talk about their experiences is something that I'm trying to be more intentional about.
I love that. Lainey, I saw you put something in the chat. Do you have some thoughts?
Good morning. Thank you. Yes, it's so wonderful to just be able to wake up and come into a place. I worked for the Animal Rescue League of Boston and came in today and I was like, we're going to do some dog work today. Like, I'm just going to get out there, and yes, I have a million things to do at my desk and computer stuff. But today's all about the staff and making sure that they're feeling comfortable working with the animals. So I agree. So thank you for that.
Yeah, we couldn't do this work without people.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bobby, do we have time for one more person?
Yeah.
What do you think? Who should we call on?
Well, I saw Kristen unmute. And so Kristen, did you have thoughts?
Hey,
Well, hi, Ariel. I wanted to say thank you for talking about this, because I think that as a white woman, I got really used to using a strong, assertive voice, interrupting when I needed to, because I was trying to assert myself in a world of men often. And I got really used to being kind of loud, vocal, bossy. And, I've really been trying this last year to step back and make more space for folks to talk, recognizing that part of me that did that to get ahead, there's also privilege in that, like being able to do that. And now if I use that, it's actually having the same effect that people had on me earlier. So I really, I think that part of this work is really just taking time not to talk, which is the hardest thing in the world, but just trying to listen and make that space feels really important. So I'm grateful that you're here talking about this, because it's easy just not to do it because we're all so busy, but it's the only way that we fix all of this. And that's a real key that I think I've learned the last couple of years.
I love that. I love that reflection. And I think I would be really remiss if I didn't mention this. So someone, Bobby, really reminded me of the privilege that we hold in our titles too. And on Friday, I brought a frontline staff member to a leadership call or a call with a lot of leaders. And that person left crying. She had never in 15 years of working in animal welfare, 15 years, never been given the opportunity to meet people from other shelters. She'd never been given the opportunity to speak with leaders and be heard. And she literally cried. And that made such an impact on me. And so, yes, however we can make space for people, I think it's so important.
And has acknowledged my privilege as a cis male in this space. I'm not going to follow Ariel and try to close up her talk, because she's brilliant and she doesn't need me to say anything to add value to what she just said. So let's keep it moving. We're going to get to national updates in a second, but we saw that topic 1 was about a very, very, very important big dog masterclass for all the folks that are struggling with big dog issues. So before we get into national updates, I'm going to toss it back over to Kristen Hassan so she can give us a very quick overview on what to expect on March 29th and March 30th.
Okay, I'm here bearing terrible news, but I think you already know this is going to be the hardest spring and summer for shelter pets we've seen in a very long time across the nation. We are lining up for this perfect storm of factors right now, what we're seeing, if your shelter is full of big dogs right now in particular, and if you're still seeing a lot of cats hanging around your system, that is not normal for this time of year. The census counts in shelters in most parts of the US are much higher than they typically are this time of year. And what that means is that we won't have that cushion of space that we have come to expect. So if we get our kennel census down to half, when we get that influx of pets in the spring and summer, we're able to accommodate them. We're not going to have that this year. So we're going to have to do things differently, along with using every tool in our toolbox to keep as many pets in their homes and communities and get as many out as quickly as possible. So we partnered up with the Maddie's Million Pet Challenge, and I see Dr. Hurley here. I'm not sure if Dr. Levy is here. We partnered up with them, and we're bringing you a 2-day free virtual conference. We have almost nearly 2,500 folks signed up. We really want to get the whole industry here. I see some of our presenters around the call. Claire's here. She's going to be talking about getting lots of fast outcomes of big dogs, among other things. The reason this matters is what we did is we tried to take people who have done the work in high volume environments. So if you're wondering why these speakers, it's people that have demonstrated that they can deal with real space crisis. They can move quickly and they can avoid warehousing. They can make sound decisions on what animals that can be saved in the midst of a space crisis and how to save the maximum number. And we have some real experts to debunk some of the ideas we have in animal welfare still about big dogs. And what we know is that the big dog crisis is not about the dogs themselves. It's about affordable pet inclusive housing. The reason our shelters are full of pit bull dogs is because people cannot find anywhere to live with them. So that is the starting point for our conference, is that there's nothing wrong with the dogs. We know they're amazing, but we face this massive structural barrier to getting them into homes and keeping them out of the shelter. But this is quick 25-minute sessions. It's RACE certified. So if you need those RACE CE credits, you can get them. It's 8 hours and anyone should attend this. So all levels, your frontline staff member to your chief veterinarian. It is the best information based on everything we know on how to get big dogs into homes faster, how to keep the maximum number in their homes and communities, and how to really bring your entire community on board to help support you. And we're seeing a couple of things. People are not maximizing volunteers. When we go around the country and we talk to shelters, we're finding that volunteer programs are about 10% of what they should be in most of your shelters. People just aren't utilizing volunteers. They're still not. And if they are, they're primarily using them for dog walking. Well, this is a huge problem right now, right? Because dog walking, when you have 300 additional dogs, what does that do? It burns out your volunteers. So we'll be talking about things like pivoting your volunteer program to focus on fast outcomes, bringing more volunteers on every day to help you. So it's real usable information. Nothing in the conference is pie in the sky or talking about theory or philosophy. It's all grounded how to make change. And we're also going to be talking about what life in shelters does to dogs. And we have Dr. Sagerson, who will be talking about taking a trauma-informed approach to shelter dogs. And what that does is it gets us out of this idea that there's something pathologically wrong with the dogs in our care. So we hope it'll blow your mind. We hope it brings the whole movement together. Allison just let me know we have 2,450 people registered. And this is free. It's totally free. And if people register and they can't attend in person, they can watch it later. And anyone who attends will get a giant resource list of everything you need when you leave to implement the things that we're talking about. And the last thing I want to say is that my background is in moderately funded, very large municipal shelters. I have never had any money to do anything other than the grants our amazing national partners have provided us with. All of these are free or very low cost solutions, and all of them can be done with volunteers. So we're not going to come in and tell you to do a bunch of things you can't afford or don't have time to. I want to share, I think someone has shared the link to the conference. But I also want to share this blog. If you are sitting here and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't wait till March 28th. And I think it's 28th and 29th, right, Allison?
Yes.
Okay. If you're sitting here wondering, I can't wait, here's a blog for you of things you can be doing right now. And I'm going to post this right now. These are some of the things we'll be talking about at the conference, just to give you a teaser. And I'll just give you one tip and then I will be done. Go through your adoption applications, your foster applications, your rescue applications, and get rid of barriers now. We have yet to see one website in animal welfare that doesn't have arbitrary barriers, not one. You think about most people are meeting you through your website. And most websites, especially in government shelters, are decidedly unfriendly. They do not make you feel warm and fuzzy or wanting to help. Right now, go to your website, go to those applications, get rid of the word application entirely and make it a sign up, and change that now. That's the quickest way to get more pets out of your shelter. And lastly, to wrap all of this up, we couldn't do this without Maddie's fund. Not only are they hosting it, but they expanded their Zoom capacity so we can have several thousand people on a call at once. And they are helping make this whole thing happen. So among the three of us, we're really excited. And if you think, oh my gosh, I had a great speaker who could have done this, we're going to be collecting signups because we hope this is the first of several of this type of conference, because they are so accessible to people. And so we'll be taking signups if you think, oh my gosh, I want my team member to present at the next conference. We truly just picked a handful of people we knew had done the work. So no real rhyme or reason to that, except they're people that know how to get it done and they've shown success. So I think that's it, and want to thank you all. And also just want to thank Bobby Mann, who always leads with such grace and kindness and has taught me a lot about making space for others. So I feel like I've already talked way too long, but Bobby, thank you. And thanks all for having me today.
Thank you so much, Kristen. And I'm so excited for the conference. We are having similar challenges at our shelter, so this is super timely. I think it's time to open it up for national updates.
Okay, well, I will start it off because I already mentioned it a little bit earlier. So first off, every single call, including today's, that you watch live or on demand, we have our chance to win a prize through the Maddie's Fund monthly giveaway. So I'm dropping the...
Irene, I think you might have gotten muted.
Yes, I muted myself and didn't drop the link, but I fixed it. Okay, thank you. And also today is the first day of the application for the Black, Indigenous, and People of Color led operating support grant. So if your animal welfare organization is led by or is headed through the board by a member of the BIPOC community, please apply. The window is open from today through March 31st. And you can call me if you have any questions. Thank you.
Hey guys, good morning. It's Bethany with Best Friends. Hey, Bobby. Wanted to let you guys know our next town hall will be March 24th, next Thursday, and it's using transparency to empower and support your community. So it's all about how can you be open and honest with your community so they can support your work. We've got an awesome panel lined up. Renee Gutierrez will be there, John Gary. It'll be moderated by Michelle Dawson. I will pop the link in the chat and we hope to see you guys there.
Thanks, Bethany and Irene. I'm super excited to see Dawson facilitate that.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eliza. I'm here on behalf of the Haas One Health Working Group. I just wanted to let everyone know, if you haven't seen it already, that their One Health Integration Toolkit was released last week. It is an overview of what One Health is, how you can integrate it into your organizations, how it relates to animal services, human services, how to build partnerships in your communities, and many, many other things. And so I'm about to drop the link in the chat. And if you have any questions about it, I'm also going to drop my email right after that. Thank you.
So Eliza is someone who does not like attention. She's behind the scenes. She's literally the glue of human animal support services. So if any of you have ever used a resource or anything related to Haas, it's because Eliza touched it somehow. So if you have, can we please give Eliza a thank you in the chat? This is coming from me as well, Eliza. You are the best. I don't know how I would live my life without you. So shout out to Eliza. Look at that. Sorry, you're going to have to put your email like 17 times, Eliza, because this chat is about to get lit. Anyone else? Let's keep it rolling. Well, that is very timely because I had DM'd the amazing Dr. Hurley earlier and said, we're going to probably have about 40 minutes for you, and you're going to have 39. So as we are moving through this new model of community-centric sheltering, or this new time of COVID or post-COVID, or this new normal, we're all moving in a direction, and we're all going through change management. We're all going through culture change. And it could be things as simple as how you're buying your things online to how you're interacting with your family. With all of this change, one of the things that we know is that there's things as early adopters, like many of you who have been on these calls for a very long time, to people that are just joining this community. But whatever you're dealing with, there's always a time and a place for every person that's entering that ecosystem. And very early on in this, Dr. Hurley is someone who really helped me frame this conversation, so I did not drive myself crazy with wanting to grow and bring everybody in, and also just be a part of the future. So Dr. Hurley, I want to come to you about this amazing talk that you've done previously on this call about the diffusion of innovation.
Thanks so much, Bobby. And it's so good to be here with all of you in daylight savings time. It's 8 o'clock, people. It's not 7. To give a little context, I read this book about the diffusion of innovation. I learned about it in this large-scale social change fellowship that I'm part of. And I read it through twice during the summer of 2020. So that's the context in which I encountered that material. And for those who don't know me, Bobby, did you mention I'm the director of the UC Davis Correct Shelter Medicine Program and the co-founder of the Maddie's Million Pet Challenge, and the co-founder of the Million Cat Challenge before that. And we're going to get a little theoretical, but I hope that this actually, you find this practical in sort of living your day-to-day life and navigating through all the change that we're in the midst of right now. So I'm going to share my screen, but I hope that this is really a sort of lively chat. Move that over here so I can keep up with the chat. All right, great book, The Diffusion of Innovation. There's been like 5 editions since 1950 by the same author, so he's really into this. And this is the context in which I encountered this, was summer of 2020. And some of you will have seen, I've showed this quote from this article. This is from the Institute of Healthcare Improvement, which I look to a lot, sort of as a model for transformation in human healthcare, which shares so many of the same challenges that we face in animal welfare. With this idea that COVID pulled back the curtain on issues many of us never thought to worry about, including what happens when patient needs outstrip the resources available to adequately provide care to everyone who needs it. And we could take the language specifically about healthcare out of that, and it applies to over a century of work in animal welfare, right? The needs that we have been asked or asked ourselves to meet have outstripped the resources that we have to provide them, at least 10 months out of the year, for the last 100 years of animal welfare. And that's been reflected in animals that should have live outcomes not getting them. It's been reflected in conditions in the shelter that don't feel exactly like what we want to deliver to the animals. It's been reflected in exhaustion and overwork and compassion fatigue and burnout and leaving the profession for people. It's even been reflected in serious health and mental health crises for the people as well as the animals caught up in this system that has been chronically outstripped by the needs that we are asked to meet. And y'all have probably seen these graphs over and over, but just kind of a reminder of what it meant to drop intake. It meant a direct, actually even more so. This is dogs, intake. I know this is outcomes, but this is euthanasia. Euthanasia went down even more than intake it did. The red line is 2020 and the yellow line is 2019. So those are the two really relevant ones. Look at, as intake fell off a cliff, so did euthanasia. Same for cats, as intake dropped, so did euthanasia. See how the yellow line, that's 2019, red line, 2020, yellow line, 2019, red line, 2020. It's appropriate. My cat has come to celebrate this. This is from shelters. So that was pet point data. You know, just trying to aggregate the data in different ways to understand the impact of dropping intake during the pandemic. A 38% decrease in canine euthanasia, a 44% decrease in feline euthanasia, a total of almost 250,000 fewer animals being euthanized just in that group of shelter animals count reporting shelters. Flip side, the cost of the previous normal of sort of unregulated intake into shelters was potentially almost 250,000 lives just in this group of shelter animals count reporting shelters. That's a powerful thing to have had the opportunity to see, right? And it's not just those animals that, you know, maybe a different solution was found for, but also we know that the largest category of animals coming into most shelters are strays, and fewer than half of strays are returned to their owners in US shelters. And so in addition to almost 250,000 fewer animals losing their lives, also we know that meant hundreds of thousands of animals perhaps not separated from their families, perhaps returned to their homes in their neighborhood of origin rather than coming into a shelter that didn't have the flexibility to waive fees or didn't have the wherewithal to connect with people in the languages that they speak or get the animals back to them for people who didn't have transportation to come into the shelter, right? That's all stuff we want to do, but it was beyond the capacity of the system to accomplish it reliably. And this is just a quote from the Best Friends 2020 State of Animal Sheltering Report. Just again, like it was such a tragic time, it was such a difficult time. And yet to sort of go back to sorry, I just was distracted by something in the chat. To go back to also some of the real positives that came out of that time, as we are in a really different phase of the diffusion of innovation right now, right? Like that just gave us, boom, like we had a chance to really try something different. And the number of dogs and cats entering shelters and needlessly dying fell by the largest rate ever recorded. Like, let's take that in. We were making headway, but this was the most headway we ever made. Something happened during the pandemic that reflected the best we ever did. And this is just one quote from a survey that we did in the summer of 2020 from, as Kristen said, politely, a moderately funded public shelter. When the pandemic hit, we were able to put in place more stringent managed intake policies. We were able to see a true difference in our ability to meet the 5 freedoms, truly care for the animals, reduce length of stay, and reduce our net county cost. The series of emergencies and tragedies allowed us to push forward programming that led us from a 50% save rate and a population of 100 cats and 120 plus dogs on any given day to a shelter with 0 to 20 cats and 20 to 40 dogs on any given day, 95% save rate, enrichment programs, playgroups, polarized cat kennels, virtually 0 disease outbreaks, better relationship with our community, you name it. That was a year ago. That was actually, that was April of 2021. That was a little less than a year ago. It was a good place that is available if we can get through the change management that we need to do to stabilize that and lead it to be accepted so that all shelters can have these policies. Recognizing that just having some ability to communicate with the public about what is the right solution for an animal, an issue that they have encountered, whether the shelter is full or not. Just the opportunity to be able to say to someone, hey, that animal's chances will be better if you do this instead of bringing it in. Or, hey, that animal's chances will be better if you bring it in right away instead of waiting 4 hours until this afternoon. Recognizing that that communication is critical for us to be able to do our job in a professional and humane and a sustainable way was the impetus for creating this guideline on appointment-based pet intake into shelters. It's not saying which pets should come in, when pets should come in, but that there should be the opportunity to have a conversation about that with each community member presenting a potential pet for intake into the animal shelter. So I want to focus on that when we talk about the diffusion of innovation. And this is a quote that opens the book on the diffusion of innovation. There is nothing more difficult to plan, more doubtful of success, nor more dangerous to manage than the creation of a new order of things. Whenever his enemies have the ability to attack the innovator, they do so with the passion of partisans, while the others defend him sluggishly, so that the innovator and his party alike are vulnerable. That's a quote from a book written in 1513, and we are feeling it now, right? Put in the chat if you've seen the Diffusion of Innovation curve. So this, I first encountered this when I was doing a workshop for the Large Scale Social Change School. And it sort of blew my mind even then. The idea is that no matter what innovation we're talking about, the adoption of that innovation, the adoption of that new thing follows a predictable pattern. So I see that a lot of you are familiar with it, but let's look at sort of this pattern. So we start with a very small sort of sparky group of innovators, and then we move predictably to a larger group of early adopters. Then we have the more early majority, and importantly, each group only gets to communicate and influence the next group. So you don't get to reach across the curve. In animal welfare, I've often been sort of in this innovator group, although to be honest, I have been in the laggard group as well for certain innovations. But I often want to reach over here to the laggards and shake them and say, do the thing, do the thing. But the way this works is you get to communicate with the next group over. The only way you can reach the group after that is to reach your group and empower them to communicate with the next group over. And it is like a waste of time and a recipe for heartache to try to reach the late majority before you've reached the early majority. As change makers, we often want to do the opposite, right? We want to crack the hardest nuts instead of harvesting the lowest hanging fruit, to shamelessly mix my metaphors. And I just wanted to say a little bit more about what each of these groups look like. So the innovators are the most venturesome is the adjective for them, but also notice in some ways in the context in which they are innovators, they tend to be a very privileged group. They tend to be higher income, higher education, because they are more broadly connected. They're sort of cosmopolitan. They can reach into different areas and different concepts from different contexts and integrate them to come up with new ideas. They're also connected across geography. So they are not just limited to what they see in their own region. They attend national calls and hear about what's going on across the whole country. The early adopters, of course, are similar. They are considered to be thought leaders in their own social networks. They're also wealthier than late adopters, and they are the most influential group for diffusion, right? Because they're bigger, they're a much bigger group. than the innovators. The innovators are only 3.5%. The early adopters are 13.5%. And they're the ones that spread it to the early majority. They're a respected group. A lot of you, if you're not an innovator, if you weren't the very first on board, you are in the early adopter group and you will play a key role in spreading innovations. But I also want to think about this in terms of the audience of our communities. So a lot of times, right now it feels like in animal sheltering, we're bought in, we want to do the things, but not all of our community is bought in. So who are the innovators in your community? And importantly, who are the early adopters in your community? Because those are going to be the key to spreading it to the rest of your community, the users of sheltering services. Then we have the early majority, which are curious, open, willing to read your website, listen to you on the radio, follow you on Facebook and kind of buy what you're selling as long as you have the chance to sell it. Listen to the early adopters. When they say something on Nextdoor, they'll pay attention to that. But they're more cautious. They're more resource limited. Then we have the late majority. These are the people who did not wear masks until it was mandated, right? When they are more cautious and they tend to be skeptical about it. They may not adopt until they're sort of pushed into it by policy, by cost, by convenience, or by intense social pressure to do the thing. And then we have the laggards, which for a change maker, I tend to think of them like laggard equals jerks. But to be fair, these are the lowest resourced people, groups, organizations, communities. And therefore, they have the lowest risk tolerance because they feel like they're on the edge. And in animal sheltering, sometimes we'll say this, and sometimes we'll see this, and some of you have experienced. It's the biggest, poorest shelters in the most politically intense climates that really need the innovations, but they're cautious because they've gotten slammed so hard, or because things are so difficult, they're so close to the edge. It's hard for them to innovate. We saw, and there was some shelters that we saw in COVID see their chance, see their low risk chance, and they were as innovative as anyone when they had the opportunity to do it in a way where they were more protected.
Dr. Hurley, I love this conversation so much. I want to frame something because I feel like you're giving me the 2.0 version of this conversation very early on. We talked about the B2B, so shelter to shelter. And when you're talking about shelter to community and how you got to find those innovators in your community, I'd love to just quickly pose a question to the group. How many of you have at least one person that you know, whether they're a volunteer or a donor or someone that believes in this sort of community-centric model? Doesn't have to be everyone, just one person. If you do, please just put yes in the chat so we can see that there is that innovation happening. And Dr. Hurley, I'm going to toss it back to you.
Thank you, Bobby. I actually have a thing later for name names, so that's good, just in case we don't get there. And some of you have seen this. This was just so cool to see how this played out with the Million Cat Challenge. Based on the 5 key initiatives developed by innovators in the field, the challengers that joined in the first year, 13.4% of estimated US shelter cats. So it tracked really well. Challengers that joined in the next wave sheltered 38% of US sheltered cats in 2015 through 2017. That's what got us to the first million in the Million Cat Challenge. So just really striking, like we think, oh, is that true for us? It's true for us. And this is what we saw. The shelters that were the last to join were those that contracted with 87 different cities and they had to deal with those codes, or there was a legal barrier, or there was no vet, not only at the shelter, but even in the whole community that would do return to field. So they faced a lot of high barriers, or they were very isolated. So they had low connectivity to the field. And it wasn't until it had become, some of them, of course, still haven't been able to implement the key initiatives of the Million Cat Challenge. But it wasn't until late and it became nearly ubiquitous that some of those shelters were able to come on board. So just thinking about it, in terms of sort of pulling us out of our tendency to just like be frustrated with the laggards. Put in the chat for what innovation anywhere of food, tech, driving an electric vehicle, in animal sheltering, like were you first on board for open adoptions, or were you just like last on that train, or you're still not bought in? What have you been an early adopter for? And where are you a late adopter or a laggard? Smartphones early, Crocs late. Yeah, I was back in 1990 when I was working in a shelter, I was one of the first to push for Chameleon. I was like really into tech, or at least into the idea of databases. Here's an area where I'm a late adopter, fashion. Like I wear my high-waisted jeans almost so long that they roll back into style before I finally give them up.
Dr. Hurley, I will say that if you look at the new Louis Vuitton or Yves Saint Laurent fashion shows, they look very similar to your pictures on the left. So you might have been an early adopter, actually.
I want to see a few more of like, where were you a laggard? Did you resist sushi until like it was in the McDonald's? Laggard, TikTok. I'm a TikTok laggard too. Sue Webb, early spay neuter. I was a laggard on early spay neuter. I was really skeptical. I was an adoption counselor in 1990, and I was like whispering to people, like, I have to make you do this, but I'm sorry, I don't think it's a good idea. But for the record, I think it's a great idea now. So, I go through this exercise. I think it's kind of interesting and fun, but also to think about like, well, what would it take, or what did it take for those things where you were a laggard, where you were slow to adopt? What did it take for you to get on board where you have, you eventually did get a smartphone, or, now you love sushi or you love avocado toast? What was the experience that led you to sort of be open to trying that? Pressure from loved ones. Everyone else was doing it. Like you just couldn't escape it. You got somebody's Friday funnies and there was something on TikTok, and like, so you went and looked, and then it really was pretty good. Seeing data that it worked well. So reassurance for the skeptics, right? Shaping the path to it, making it cheaper, easier to use. Whoops. So when we're talking about managed admissions or intake by appointment, that's really actually an aggregate of a number of different innovations. It's a complex sort of system of innovations, or community-oriented sheltering. Like we could name them all the same thing, right? And then they're sort of mixed up in the minds of the public as well. But even sort of type into the chat, like what are a few things that are one part of managed admission or intake by appointment, right? You have to have counseling. You have to have something as an alternative. Space for it, talking to people. What are the components? Yeah, you have to have the technology, you have to have resources. And even like thinking about what are the innovations we are asking our community to adopt? What are the different behaviors we are asking our community members to perform? Like what is one thing? Yeah, hold pets. What is another thing we're asking people to do differently from what they were doing before? Post found animals, great. Advocating on social, yeah. So I thought of a few things, but this is not a comprehensive list. But just to give an idea of like how many innovations are we asking people to do is actually kind of a lot. We're asking, first of all, we're really asking people to connect with the shelter before they just walk in with a pet. right? We really want them to do that. Contact us first. That's a new behavior. That right there is one big innovation, just all by itself. The idea that before you walk in, before you load that litter of kittens away from their mother into the car and drive them across town to the shelter an hour and a half through traffic, just give us a holler or check our website, connect with us somehow, or look for a stray dog's owner before bringing it in. Use rehoming resources to directly place a pet that can't be kept. Care for neonatal kittens you have found. Make an appointment to surrender a pet. Leave healthy community cats where they are, or access TNR resources instead of bringing them into the shelter. Like, each one of these things is its own innovation that will follow its own adoption curve. And that's one of the challenges we've been faced with, is trying to do, and this is an incomplete list. There's about 20 like significant innovations we are asking our community members to adopt that we have implemented all at once in a pandemic, in the midst of a historic staffing crisis. Like, so if we're tired, there's a reason. But to the extent that, you know, you have the opportunity to even pick one of these things, just one innovation that you would like your community to adopt and that you would like to like create some clarity around and sort of work that through the adoption curve, you think that can be really helpful. Just pick one and then repeat the process. And I'm going to go through this kind of quickly, but just to just peek at the chat. This is sort of how people, when you're asking whatever group they're in, this is sort of the process that people go through when they decide to adopt an innovation. And you can think about this again. I think it's helpful to think about it for ourselves. How did we get to the point of adopting an innovation? First, you got to know of it. You got to know it's a thing. You got to know why, and you have to know how. And oftentimes that's where it breaks down. Like, we want people to connect with the shelter. How? How do you actually do it? And when we've visited shelters, we're like, wow, it was really hard for us to find the phone number. So like, no wonder so many people are showing up, because it's just hard to find the phone number. And as it said in the chat too, shelters have to have the resources for those phones to get answered. Otherwise, the whole thing breaks down. But in terms of connecting to people, so first they have to know of it, why to do it, how to do it. And so really important, you know, to create resources to streamline that for us to communicate it to the community. But remember, so this is some great resources on communicating the why, and also remembering to communicate the how. Then we come to persuasion. You can know it. You can know why, you can know how, and you can still not be interested in doing it, right? We definitely have that experience. So providing the social context. Do people like me do this thing? This is really best communicated peer-to-peer. So to the extent that we can have people putting this on social, putting it on Nextdoor, that's where people get the news of this is the way to handle this. Okay, I got back home. And I just found that as like a posting on the day in my neighborhood on the day I made these slides. Even with knowledge and persuasion, people have to make the leap to adoption. And we can do pilots, but to think about like, how can we give people in the community the opportunity to pilot? And so things like Wait 48 is a way for them to think about it as a pilot in their own lives. They're not like, I have to keep this pet forever. I just have to keep this pet for 2 days. Even having an appointment that afternoon instead of immediate intake gives people a few hours to pilot the idea of posting something instead of bringing the animal in, and gives them the opportunity to maybe experience success with that. And if they don't, then bringing the animal in. So just like putting some brakes on can be really helpful. Thanks, Bobby, for dropping that resource into the chat. Then the next stage is evolution and reinvention. So that's response to feedback and real life experience. And that's where I think it can be really helpful. And I know that this discussion has been had in this group about, but it can be scary, especially when we're really under fire, to open the door to feedback from the community of like, how is it working out? What was your experience? Like really reaching out to people who are, whatever innovation it is that you're working with, getting feedback from people in the community about their experience. Was it hard to reach the shelter? Was the communication unclear? Were they successful? Was it frustrating? You know, to the extent that you can get that feedback, and also from your staff. When the animal did come in without an appointment, what was going on with that? So that you can really learn from both sides of the equation. And then there's the confirmation phase where people decide whether they'll keep doing the behavior, both internally. You know, we've seen some shelters like, it's too hard. We're getting too much pushback. We're going to move away from intake by appointment, and externally where people decide, I tried it. It was horrible. I'm not going to do it again. And the discontinuers are similar to the laggards in terms of discontinuers are likely to be the lowest resource, highest risk, most threatened environments where ideally we provide support to really help them. This is just speaking of high risk, high resistance situations where major changes happen. This is the LA County Animal Services received an award from the National Association of Counties for managed intake. They contract with over 50 different cities in LA County, which also has the highest ratio of lawyers per capita of any place in the world, last I heard. So really impressive achievement. And also like that kind of thing creates momentum and inertia that helps pull the whole diffusion of innovation curve forward. So it may be helpful to consider, you know, again, for just one innovation that you're working on, where are you right now? Where are the people in your community that you're asking to adopt this? Are they at a place where they just really like knowledge is the problem? They just don't know that that's the policy and it needs to be communicated. Or are they like, everybody knows this now, but they're just not sure. And so we need to think about persuasion. Or is there something you can do to help them make the decision, to give them the equivalent of a free sample of rehoming their pet or finding a stray, the owner of a stray animal, or caring for some needle kittens, and so on. So to think about where you are. And then these are the characteristics that can help increase the likelihood of adoption of an innovation. So again, you can take one thing that you're trying to get people to do and look at these 5 characteristics and see, could you increase the reward? Can you make it a little less costly to do the right thing or a little more convenient? Could you make it a little less convenient or a little more costly to do the thing you're trying to get people away from doing? Can you show people how it's compatible with their existing values? Can you make it simpler? We talked about trialability. Or can you make it more visible? Can you post the successes that people are having, rehoming their own pets or finding the owners of pets on social media, on your own social media, so that it's just more obvious what the benefits are? And I see, even though Bobby gave me lots of time, we're still running out of time. So I'm gonna, but if you can think about one way you could increase one of these 5 factors for an innovation related to managing emissions that would help you scale it, type that in the chat. And just recognize, like, this is not about diffusion of innovation. This is just a hellish complicating factor right now that is working hard against the diffusion of this particular, like this innovation is crashing right up against a historic veterinary shortage. And it's hard and it's painful. And we're, you know, there will be solutions. It's not clear what they are. And this is getting mixed up with the consequences of the veterinary shortage. And I'm showing this from Facebook because like we're named and we've been named before for innovations, but this is getting confused. Like these are people who don't want shelters to fill up and euthanize animals and be full of disease and take animals from their owners and to have them never be reunited. They're just responding to the fact that they can't get a dang TNR appointment. They feel like there's just not service. It's true, the phones aren't being answered because there's not staffing in the shelters to answer the phones in some cases. Like some of these shelters are in a really difficult situation right now. So just for us to be clear on our communication, that increasing intake does not solve the lack of spay-neuter resources or staffing limitations in shelters. And capacity for care and intake by appointment are not the opposite of full service and community service. So to try and really work on simple messages around that, I threw this slide in as we were talking like have some code red resources ready for managing not only a space crisis, but a staffing crisis. Because a lot of shelters really are in a point where even like if their space isn't full, their veterinary resources are so limited that they're only able to like put a few animals through that bottleneck and get them out alive, at least in California where they have to be spayed and neutered to leave shelters alive. And then just like reason for hope. We're on the steep part of the curve. Once we have about 10 to 20% adoption, it's often impossible to stop the further diffusion of new ideas, even if we wanted to. We're in the hard part right now. You don't have to convince everyone. You have to convince 10 to 20% of the people in your community to do each new thing you're trying to get them to do. Here are a couple of articles that Julie Levy and I put together. Well, I'm responsible for this, the one on the left, but she and I are co-conspirators on the one on the right to try and create more support for these practices in animal shelters. And don't break your heart on the laggards. Haters gonna hate, laggards gonna lag. It's not because they're trying to be jerks, it's because they're scared. And the way to get there is to work with the ones who really want to listen. So thank you.
Shout out Dr. Hurley. Haters gonna hate, laggards gonna lag. Well, I appreciate you so much. This always feels like therapy to me when I get to have this conversation with you. I'm gonna toss it over to Ariels to close this out for the day.
Thank you everyone for a really fun chat. First of all, the chat was blowing up and it was so much fun to read everyone's comments. Thank you, Dr. Hurley, for everything. I feel like every time I hear her speak, I'm just leaving amazed. And I hope that we all go into our weeks with positivity and intentionality. And thank you everyone for joining the call today.
Bye everybody. Happy spring forward. We're awake. Woo!
Thanks everyone.